net zero was a time for crofting just to survive, or whether or not it was time for crofting to thrive. I think crofting offers a model, an exemplar for net zero living, particularly in rural areas. I think that's been true well before we understood the concept of net zero, and will be even more true as we develop ideas and thinking around net zero. Crofting really can be an exemplar for net zero living. Today, really looking at the role of croftings as custodians over the environment, peatlands, for example, the creation of new woodlands, even the role of crofters through time in energy generation and future energy generation when it comes to renewable energy. I would quite comfortably agree that it could be perceived as an extra layer of bureaucracy. Maybe the environmentalist scientific community hasn't done a great job of showcasing the opportunity that can come from net zero, particularly to communities like the crofting community. What we do know is that net zero and the transition to net zero is going to underlay every aspect of society, and crofting cannot be exempt from that. And really, crofting will thrive, I think, with the shift to net zero. There may be added layers of bureaucracy here or there, but I think the overall positive impact of shifting to net zero, or the impact, will be positive for crofting. Crofters have probably already practicing a lot of the principles of net zero. So I think crofters are incredibly well set up to transition to net zero, if already not at net zero. I think there may be some changes that may be needed in terms of livestock density at times, what kind of livestock are being grazed. But yeah, I think if there's any group of people, to be honest, ready to transition to net zero, crofters are going to be quite far up there. I think there's a lot of economic opportunities for crofters and crofting communities to come out of net zero. Overall, I think that the advantage will be in favour of crofters as we shift to net zero. Yeah.
I would classify myself as a sheep hill crofter, but I have pigs and goats at home too.
What kind of crofter would you like to be?
I would like to grow my sheep flock and maybe start a herd of cows as well, and produce my own meat and sell it locally.
The gathering's been really successful. It's achieved quite a lot of what we hoped it would, prompted a lot of really good discussion, and we've brought people together from across the crofting counties to discuss the really important issues. And there's a lot going on just now in crofting. We've got an agriculture bill coming up, reform to the agricultural support system, crofting law reform as well, coupled with land reform and the ever-present issues with rural development and retaining population. And these are all topics that we covered over the course of the last 2 days, and linking that in with crofting and why crofting is important for delivering on these.
We heard quite a lot about climate change, net zero, sustainability. Is there a place for that kind of thinking in crofting?
There absolutely has to be a place for the thinking around net zero and climate, because we are in a climate emergency. This is a crisis, and crofting has to recognise that and play its role in it. It's also obviously a key driver for government policy, and it's going to be the basis for the future agricultural support system. But what we need to do is we need government to recognise the positive contribution that crofting already makes around climate and around biodiversity. But we also need to look at where can crofting improve, and crofters need to be supported to make the changes that they need to. But what's key to all of this is that active crofting should be supported and needs to be part of that, and is totally compatible with net zero ambitions and the climate emergency.
There are also some fairly radical suggestions about things like co-working, sharing equipment, that sort of thing. Do you see that as the way forward?
I think there's definitely room for innovative solutions and for new approaches to how we deal with some of the challenges facing crofting. One of the sessions we had was on rural depopulation, and particularly focused on the issue of housing. And housing, as we know, is a problem across the Highlands and Islands. And looking at innovative solutions to how we deal with that problem is a must.
I'm actually actually an engineer. I lived in Australia, but I moved to the Northwest Highlands about 7 years ago, and I got the croft about 6 years ago. Started crofting then.
What kind of crofter are you?
Diversified, but primarily livestock still. So I've got a lot of sheep, but they're Shetlands, not a commercial breed. But I've also got a polytunnel, vegetables. I've planted a bunch of trees. So just trying to get the absolute most out of my croft as I can.
There were loads of interesting ideas coming your session today.
Yeah.
Tell me about them.
The final sessions, particularly the final question, was about public goods and what public goods can crofting provide. And part of that is because the new subsidy system is likely to be about public money for public goods. But the really exciting thing in the session was that what it actually was not people talking about how they could do something to get money, but how they could do things with crofting that would benefit their community and wider Scotland as well. So there was things about social crofting to provide mental health and courses and training for young people or people with troubles, access to recreational land, health, so physical as well, so providing quality food and growing quality local food for people in these areas that quite often can't get access to good fresh fruit and vegetables. All the usual carbon and biodiversity things, but also just a lot around how the resources that crofters manage can be used to benefit the community.
How doable are these things? We heard equipment sharing, we heard striving for biodiversity, or are crofters too conservative with a small c?
I think they're all achievable, and I think while crofters may sometimes be slow to change, I mean, most crofters I know, if they hear a good idea, they're quite happy to hear it out and give it a go. I mean, I think there's obviously problems that are difficult for all of crofting. We know access to crofts is a problem, we know succession's a problem, we know aging population and consolidation of crofts and out-of-use crofts. And those all stand in the way of these amazing options and plans that we have. But the crofters themselves, I don't think would stop it. I think most crofters want what's best for their community, what's best for their land. And I think if we can provide the support, and sometimes that's knowledge sharing, facilitation, training, I think crofters will be very keen to deliver these things.
How long is crofting going to survive?
I mean, I hope it survives for longer than any of us are here. I mean, I think there's so much potential in the system. It's a system that has maintained rural communities for hundreds of years. It's still here, it's still viable. And yes, there is change coming, and yes, there's a lot of challenges, but the structure of crofting and the culture and the community of crofting, I think absolutely can tackle those challenges and be a key part of delivering an amazing future for these areas.
How much of a challenge is the climate emergency?
The climate emergency, it is an international issue, and we all need to be addressing it. And I think crofting is not too challenged by it, except for the pressure on to take the land use and use it for other things. I think that's the biggest challenge at the moment, is the policy focus on it, which may end up with crofting being marginalised and things like just peatland restoration, rewilding, no livestock. Those are the challenges to us. So if we can show that we can contribute to reducing carbon, contribute to healthy ecosystems, then we should be able to flourish with the climate emergency and help alleviate the effects on the rest of the country.
Well, we set off on our 24-hour journey to look at how crofting contributes to the big policy issues that we're facing today, the big challenges. Obviously the list is quite long, but the obvious ones are things like climate change, biodiversity loss, the loss of culture, the loss of our resources, the loss of there's a lot of losses here actually, aren't there? And the loss of carbon and how we stop that, and so on. So we set out to show how crofting in itself delivers a contribution to mitigating the problems that we have. And I think it was sort of really shown, particularly as the 24 hours started to conclude, And we went through this journey of looking at a wider sense what crofting did, and then looked at some very specific issues like biodiversity and housing and crofting agriculture and so on, and sort of came to the conclusion that of course crofting doesn't have all the answers. It's not the utopia and the panacea to solve all the planet's problems. But the thing that's really important is that it has an enormous amount to contribute, and it contributes interestingly to all of the challenges that we were presented with at the beginning. We realised that actually crofting does contribute to helping to do something about these challenges. So yeah, I think the conference, the gathering as we call it actually, the gathering achieved what it set out to do. It got some great minds together and had some really useful conversations.
These challenges that we talk about will mean changes in the way crofters work. Are they up to that challenge?
I think they are. It's a mindset thing. I don't want to sound cliche saying that, but the reality is that we have to think completely differently about everything we do. Somebody I was talking to today said, there's no point in crofters changing the way we do our crofting if we then go out and jump on an aeroplane to take a holiday in wherever. It's a complete mind change. So it's obviously not just about crofting and changing croft practice, but croft practice can be changed, and just doing relatively simple things like looking at lowering stocking densities, looking at nutrient recycling, which is traditional. You know, I mean, a lot of these practices that we're asking crofters to look at again are things that were traditional practices anyway. So using more seaweed and manure for fertilizer instead of buying artificial fertilizer. And of course then we have the modern aspect to this, that we can be producing energy on croft, and we can actually be using that energy, for example, for electric vehicles. So crofters can be thinking about revitalising traditional practice and also adopting some of the new things that we have now.